My computer is 11 years old, so it can't do the fake backgrounds like other people have.
I love the fake backgrounds, but my router died actually, so I'm at my friend's house. But I drew this great picture of a hoopoe behind me.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I got bored,
Yeah.
got to the feet, so the feet are really pathetic. I won't get you too close to the feet.
Yeah, that's my artwork up there too. That's my, yeah, and I'm working on one right now. There's my easel.
I'm at my best mate's house and she's a peace activist, so there's like loads of political posters everywhere. I made her take them down. But I don't know what's written on her whiteboard. Yeah.
Hello,
This is good.
I think I might actually have dried out after Swansea. the Demonology conference.
Fantastic. And that's finally been published.
Oh, it's lovely to see where everyone's coming from. Finland, from Finland in Bahrain, Philly, Bournemouth. I know Miss Pussycat is from New Orleans, South London, New Jersey. How exciting. And Ireland. So, where?
Canada.
Oh, hang on.
Canada?
Canada?
Yeah. What part?
Yeah.
Pardon?
You should all be able to unmute yourselves if you so choose. Czech Republic. Wow, this is a really cosmopolitan meetup. And Tamworth. Gwyn's from Canada.
Okay, I'm originally from Canada, so there you go.
Everybody, looks like everybody's here. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much to Kasia for joining us. I'm really, really excited about this one because it marries my two favourite things, ancient Egypt and weird dreams. So we've been having a bit of back and forth, me and Kasia, and she's actually written like a sort of 20-minute little talk, which she says she's happy for us to interject dog barking questions, whatever. So I'll hand over to you now, Kasia.
Thank you very, very much for having me here. It's a real pleasure, and I'm always happy to talk about dreams and nightmares, being very familiar with those in particular, in ancient Egypt. And please do interrupt at any time. Again, I've sort of just picked a few slides just sort of to get the ball rolling. And one of the first things I want to sort of note when we talk about dreams and nightmares is to sort of let go of the idea, before we begin, that dreams and dream interpretation were necessarily an important part of everyday life in ancient Egypt over its entire history. That idea has become really embedded, especially through movies and TV shows, based upon the famous episode in Genesis in the Old Testament. But that's a biblical source, not an ancient Egyptian one. So the first thing I want to emphasize is I'm really only looking at ancient Egypt from the point of view of the ancient Egyptians and the evidence they left behind us. The second thing I want to point out is my handy dandy timeline. And it may seem obvious, but I have a difficult time with numbers myself. And it's always difficult for me to get to grips with exactly how long ancient Egyptian history was and how long a time period we're talking about. So I've made this really sort of bare bones kind of timeline where you can see, actually my pointer, does my pointer work? It doesn't, never mind. There's a gray box, and the gray box represents Egyptian history from its unification up until the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BCE. There's a green box there, and that represents the late period, so roughly about 750 BCE up through the Islamic conquest, okay? And that includes the Greco-Roman period, so the time period when Egypt was under Greek and Roman rule. On the very far left, I've got a yellow triangle, which represents the Great Pyramids of Giza. Again, just to put in perspective how long a time period we're talking about. My main focus is this gray box, and my focus in terms of my studies is the first 2,000 years. So basically from about 3,000 up to about 1,000 BCE. That's my focus. And there's a little cluster of stars there, silver stars, and what those represent is the evidence that we have for good dreams from ancient Egypt before 1000. That's it, just that little smattering of stars. Then you see a smattering of green stars. We get a lot more information starting to come in what we call the late period. To put it further in perspective, I've got this pink box on the far right, and maybe my left and right is opposite to you, I don't know, but the pink box. I don't know if anybody wants to guess sort of what the pink box might represent in terms of history. You might not know, think about it. Ancient Egyptian history. That pink box represents the history of the United States of America as a unified country. And think about how much change has happened in that tiny little box. So it's just to emphasize how difficult it is to generalize about ancient Egypt, because life for people in 1000 BCE was very, very different than 2000 years previously. We oftentimes treat Egypt as if it was one sort of monolithic culture that never changed. It's far from it. So just want to sort of get that established. And that's it for the sort of timetable. So the next thing I want to focus on is to understand dreams. One of the first things you need to do, or one of the most useful things you can do, is consider what the words are for dream itself, because that could tell us a lot about how people see the dreams. So in ancient Egypt, let me see if I can get the next slide. Here we go. Yes, there was 2 main words for dream. And here's a brief little lesson on Egyptian language as well. The Egyptian language is not pictographic. They did have letters. The first sign you see here is an R. The second one is an S. The third one is an U. The fourth one is a T. And it is followed by what we call determinatives. Every Egyptian word, not everyone, but most of them, have behind them a sign that represents the category of meaning that the word has. So words related to being a cat or being cat-like will have a little cat image. This word, resut, has the determinative of an open eye. And below it, 3 strokes. Those 3 strokes represent plural or a collective. The word itself in Egyptian comes from a root, res, which means to awaken. So in Egyptian, the word for dream is actually awakening. And again, the determinative of the open eye emphasizes the fact that you are, it was thought of as being awake, which is different than the English word, or in many languages, the word for dream has to do with the word for sleep. And the Egyptians did have a second word, kedut, which does come from their word to slumber, which was used just during a short period of time and in particular texts. So they had the 2 words. Both oftentimes have that determinative of the open eye. Now, the other point I want to make about these words is they are nouns. They're things. The Egyptians never said, I was dreaming, or I dreamt last night. It was always, I saw something in a dream, or I saw a dream, or I saw in a dream. So it's always a thing, almost like it's something external to the person. It's sort of like a zone, and you can actually see through that area into other areas, which, as we all know, happens in dreams, right? You see yourself somewhere that isn't real. Happens all the time. It was also thought of as uncontrollable. So whatever you see there is out of your control. So it's not always a positive thing to the Egyptians. I like to picture it again as sort of a portal between the worlds. And this is a great image from the tomb of Sennacherib, where Mr. Sennacherib is standing in front of a doorway, and it's actually made up of the 2 Egyptian signs for door. And if you look at the top of the door, there's like a blue shape, right? That's like rectangular with 2 little feet down at the bottom. That's actually the Egyptian word for sky. And down below, there's a red area like a U, and that's actually the earth. So this is actually a portal that spans the very heavens and the earth, which will open and he will go through into the afterlife. And in dreams, you could sort of see through that sort of doorway. Now, the earliest attestation, the earliest word for dream comes in a really interesting thing called a letter to the dead. In a particular time period in ancient Egypt, they would write letters to the dead. This one is written in a cursive form of hieroglyphs, and they would be written either on bowls, and then offerings could be put, and you leave that in a tomb, or they could be written on papyrus, such as this one, which was left by a tomb. And I've highlighted in yellow here the word for dream. You could see Egyptian papyri always are broken up and have breaks right exactly where you don't want them to be. Interestingly, the earliest word for dream here doesn't have the open eye determinative. It's actually got a divine determinative of a god. But what's interesting is what the dream itself is talking about. Why did this person, what did he say about the dream in the text? So to sort of help demonstrate how this works, I've got a slide here which shows the main characters. This is actually a line drawing from the tomb itself, and it features the author, whose name is Henny. Henny, in this text, writes to his dead father, who is depicted here. His dead father is called Meru. And he writes to his father and he says, pay attention. It's really useful for you to pay attention because I'm providing for you. I'm giving you these offerings. But pay attention because your servant, Seni, was also dead, and he's depicted here in the tomb also, is doing these nasty things to me. He's causing me to see him in a dream in the same city that you're in. And then he goes on to say, but it wasn't his own doings. It wasn't his character that drove him away. In fact, what happened to him had nothing to do with me. Wasn't the one who first caused wounds upon him. I wasn't the one who hit him first, nor was it an end of all that would happen. Others acted before I did, which of course tells us that he did act against him, and harm was done to him. But have somebody guard him in the afterlife so that he will stop watching me in these dreams. And the word there used is watch. So you get the idea that what's happening here is Henny has been having these dreams where this guy is watching him. I suspect accusingly, because he keeps saying, I didn't hurt him, I didn't hurt him. And I think he's protesting a little bit too much. And it's likely that perhaps he did hurt him, and perhaps that's even how Seni died, was from his wounds. We'll never know. But this is the earliest case of a dream, and it's not a good one. Sort of the earliest case of a dream, and it features a person being watched by another one. We have another letter that was written to the dead where the dream is sort of more positive. In that one, a man writes to his dead wife, and he says to her, expel the pain from my body, fight on my behalf in the afterlife, and let me see you fighting on my behalf in a dream. So the idea here again is the idea of vision and being able to see into the afterlife, and people being able to see you from the afterlife, almost as if the afterlife is some sort of translucent curtain in a way. You'll notice that not much detail is given to these dreams at all. So in one, we just know he's being watched. In another one, he doesn't actually have a dream. He just wants to have one. The earliest records we have of dreams come from the New Kingdom, and those are royal dreams. Those are the dreams that pharaohs had. And they're very brief. One is by a pharaoh by the name of Amenhotep II, and he is in battle, about to have battle, and the god Amun, and his name has Amun in it, so it's the main state god at the time, comes to him and gives him courage in a dream. A few centuries later, we have a person by the name of Merneptah, a pharaoh by the name of Merneptah, who again is going to have some sort of hostile action, some war, and Ptah comes to him in a dream and gives him a particular sword, which is a sword associated with courage and battle. It's called a Kopesh sword. Probably one of the most famous recorded dreams and the longest one, because that's it. Those are really brief. Amenhotep just says, Amun came to me in a dream and gave me courage. Merneptah, it's very fragmentary, says, I saw Ptah, and it's really broken up. I think he suggests that Ptah is supersized. Like, again, that happens in dreams. You see people get really giant size. But the dream of Tutmosis IV, which is pictured here, gives us a little bit more information. Tutmosis IV basically records on this stela, which you can see today at the foot of the Great Sphinx at Giza. He records on there how he was running around the Sphinx in a chariot and with his buddies, as one does. I think it's sort of like drag racing in ancient Egypt. And he gets sleepy at noontime, so he takes a nap in the shadow of the Sphinx. And during that nap, the Sphinx, in the form of the god Horem Akhet Khepri Ra Atum, so the form of the major sun god, comes to him and basically tells him, if you clear away the sand and take care of me, in return, I will give you kingship. And this happens. Tutmosis IV was probably one of the earliest conservators we have working in Egypt, some of the things we try to do today. And he was given kingship. So again, it's the main state god that comes to him. This is what he records. In all three cases, it is the main god. And in all the cases, they're being given something associated with kingship or politics. There's another pharaoh in the late period called Tanutamani, who also has a dream that he records. And like the others, he basically is using it to legitimize his right to the throne. It's an interesting dream because he actually has to have it interpreted to a priest. The others understand instantly. The gods just speak to them. They have no problem. There's no interpretation involved. They're just being spoken to in a dream, so they know what's going on. And that's it. That's the only records we have of pharaohs having dreams from ancient Egypt. Later on, in the Greek and Roman time periods, we will have texts that are said to be ancient Egyptian in source, where dreams are attributed to pharaohs, but they're what we call pseudepigraphic. They pretend to be old texts, but they're actually not. In terms of dreams of non-royal people, again, we don't have many recorded. We have 2 from the New Kingdom. But what's kind of interesting, in both cases, they feature not one of the main state gods, but they feature a goddess. And it's a particular goddess. It's Hathor. And she is depicted here holding hands with the pharaoh Seti I. And she was a goddess who was very accessible to the ancient Egyptians. The first dream we have recorded is by a man named Ipui, who basically writes that he fell asleep. Well, actually, he says, the phrasing is interesting. He says his heart was very in disarray. I suspect he was slightly tipsy at a festival. He got a little tipsy, and he kind of had a little nap during this festival, and he saw the goddess. And this was such an important event that he had it recorded on his stela. And he says on there that this event should be told to generation after generation, because this is so amazing. I mean, I saw the goddess in a dream. The other one is by Jehutiamhab, who is a priest, who records in the deep, dark part of his tomb that not only did he see the goddess Hathor, but that she spoke to him, and he emphasizes, she spoke to me with her very own mouth. And she basically tells him where to build his tomb, and he does. And again, he is so impressed by this that he incorporates it into part of this whole hymn to the goddess Hathor. He also emphasizes that she comes to him in the shape of a woman. And again, I think this probably isn't surprising. Her other shape that she can take is that of a cow, but I think it's more impressive for a New Kingdom guy to have the goddess come to him as a wonderful, beautiful woman. Probably not a dream that possibly happened more often than is recorded. I don't know. So that's it for dream reports. Not very many. In terms of texts associated with dreams and their interpretation, the earliest one is from about 1200 BCE, and it's on a very large papyrus that is in the British Museum today. And it's called Papyrus Chester BD3, just because that was the collector who owned it. And it's basically a list of dream omens and what they mean. So the most similar thing to it would be a dream dictionary that you can find at Amazon. And it's kind of interesting how it was written. This is just a fragment of it. It's written in both columns and rows. So each section starts with a row that says, if a man sees himself in a dream. And then at the end, it has a, okay, there we go. Okay. So, and then this part is the dream omen. So you have in the, this way, horizontal rows, you have like, if a man sees himself in a dream, let's say, eating the flesh of a ass, donkey, right?
Doesn't sound, does it?
This is actually a real dream. This is actually a real dream. Then it's interpreted as either good or bad. And either the word good is written there or bad in red, and that's what is in this case. And then the interpretation. So in one example, if a man sees himself in a dream eating the flesh of it's actually a female donkey or ass, that's good because it means he will be promoted. There you go, real dream. The text also has, oh, this is frozen again. I'll skip, I'll just continue through and then switch the next slide manually. It also has a section which has a personality type. So on the far left of the screen, there's a section that actually describes a person who has the personality of Seth. And he's described as a man who likes to drink a lot, likes to get into fights, kind of a brawler, one who is a real womanizer, and the women like him. He's also described as having red hair, red natural hair, because it seems to refer to his eyebrows as well as possibly his hair under his arms. In addition, it has below that, here are the dreams of the followers of Seth. And then we have 4 dreams, and then the papyrus breaks. The beginning and end of the papyrus are broken, unfortunately. But we do have 227 dreams altogether, 143 of which are good omens, and 84 are bad omens. The spell also includes the papyrus also includes a spell to keep away bad dreams that we'll come to in a minute. And finally, it has on it a little text that says, this was made by blah, blah, blah. Now, we know it actually wasn't made by that person because A, the handwriting is different. B, he is the son of the owner of the papyrus, who also is not the person who wrote it because we actually know his handwriting. So it's really kind of cool that you can do handwriting stuff in Egypt, from ancient Egypt. Okay, so I'm just going to manually slip to the next slide here. Manually do this. I can do this. I can handle this. There we go. Resume share. Boom. There we go. Okay. So that's the only papyrus that features the interpretation of dreams or dream dictionary that we have until the late period. That text that I showed you was from about 1200 BCE. It takes another 750 years or so to get another one. And while we have some references to good dreams, what we have far more evidence of is nightmares. And the nightmares that we have seem to be typical anxiety dreams. The texts that refer to them include many of the features that are known from typical anxiety dreams. Anxiety dreams occur during REM sleep, and they oftentimes feature feelings of impending doom or really intense fear, as well as that sleep paralysis, that inability to move, which is so horrific. And oftentimes it feels like you're being, crushed, as well as sudden waking, and you can oftentimes remember your nightmares as well. This is in contrast to what are called night terrors, which are a phenomenon that's associated with the waking brain. And those oftentimes aren't remembered. They're associated with, particularly children get them, and people who sleep talk or sleepwalk, and they're associated with PTSD. So that's a different phenomenon that we don't seem to have evidence for in ancient Egypt. But we do have evidence of these anxiety dreams instead. And we have remedies as well, what to do against them. So there's three main ones, on two of which are on papyri. And one of them is on an ostrakon, which is a piece of pottery. And the spell was written right on it. And it's kind of interesting because we learn a lot about these anxiety dreams from the terminology used in the texts. One of them is called the Book of Driving Out Terrors, which come in order to descend upon a man in the night. And the word used there really means to fall upon. And that's actually common in many languages where the term for nightmare has to do with something either exerting pressure or squeezing or coming down on top of you. And of course, it's common in artwork as well, where in the previous ones, the Fusili paintings actually showed a sort of gremlin or demon crushing the chest of the sleeper. You've got this beautiful sculpture that I found called The Nightmare, where again, it's actually envisaged as a being that comes to crush you. So it's very different than a good dream. It's actually conceived of as a thing, as a being that can hurt you. And because it's considered as this external being that can hurt you, it can therefore be driven out, just like you would drive out any sort of, bad thing. And again, we find that in spells. So in the part of the dream book, in sort of near the end of it, right before the personality type of Seth, there's actually a spell to keep away bad dreams. And the way this works is, as many spells, it works as a dialogue. And it features the person who is dreaming, who is basically in the spell, the dreamer is described as Horus, and the person who's going to heal him is described as Isis. And this is actually very common in medical spells because Isis was considered the goddess who was constantly having to heal and take care of her child Horus, who seemed to really always get into trouble when he was a little kid. So she's always healing him. So she's the archetypal healer. And it doesn't matter what the gender of the actual dreamer was, they'd always be Horus. And it doesn't matter who the healer is, they could be male or female, they'd always be Isis. So this spell, basically, the dreamer is supposed to say, come to me, my mother Isis, because I can see something far away from me, as if it were touching me. And again, this is a very common characteristic, right? It's like, in reality, something's far away, but in your dream, it's as if it's right there, right up close. And then the healer is supposed to say, hey, it's okay, here I am, my son Horus. Do not divulge. Don't talk about what you saw. Because in that way, your numbness may end. And the word numbness here, I think, refers to that feeling of paralysis. Your dreams will retire, and fire will go forth against that which frightens you. Behold, I have come so that I will see you, and I can drive out all the bad things, that I can root out all the deep-rooted filth, which is clearly bothering you. The response of the dreamer, hail, O you good dream, which can be seen in the night and in the day. And again, we saw this before, both when I talked about the dream reports of the two people, Ipui sees his in the day, Jehutiamhab saw his in the depths of the night. So the Egyptians recognized that you could daydream or fall asleep in the day and dream as well. Drive out all the deep-rooted filth and bad things which Seth, son of Nut, created. So here the bad dreams are being blamed on the god Seth. As Ra is vindicated against his enemies, I am vindicated against my enemies. The idea here being that Ra is the sun god, and as he is victorious against his enemies, the dreamer will be victorious against these enemies that are causing him nightmares as well. And this will work because the sun dispels the darkness. It dispels, it brings light as well. And as many spells, it ends with a therapy to do. So what you have to do is after the dreamer wakes up, you have to rub the man's face with peasant bread. I don't have any pictures of real peasant bread, so here's a nice model of an ancient Egyptian making bread. Fresh herbs, which have been marinated in beer and myrrh. You make a poultice of that, then you recite the spell, and you put this on his face, and then all the bad dreams that he has seen should be driven out. I keep challenging my students to do this, but I don't think any of them have. I imagine that this would work because I don't know about you, but if I don't think about my dream or write it down or tell it to somebody as soon as I awaken, I'll forget it. So the idea here is you want to forget what you saw as quickly as possible. Sort of the opposite of modern day psychology where they'd want you to talk about it. The other key feature of this is that it features the idea of fire going forth against nightmares. And fire in ancient Egypt is often thought of as associated with snakes. And you might go, why snakes? The reason is their venom. So this is a depiction of a black-necked spitting viper, which they actually have in ancient Egypt. And these guys are able to spit their venom at you from a distance of 3 meters. The Egyptians also depicted snakes as spitting venom. And I love this image because they use the dots just like you see in the photograph here. But the venom is actually called fire. And we know that because the word fire is written actually below the venom here. That's the Egyptian word for fire. So they thought of this venom as fire, and this great sort of weapon for expelling it is the snake. Not only any snake, but it's the rearing snake. And that Uraeus, the rearing snake in ancient Egypt, represented not only a being who could spew this venom that would dispel any sort of demons, including ones that do nightmares and expel, bring the light. But they light up the light in the morning as well, which is why the pharaoh always wears it on his brow, the uraeus. It sort of acts as a lightener wherever he goes. The cobra and the uraeus is actually the physical manifestation of the protective fiery eye of the sun itself. So light against darkness.
That book I was telling you about earlier, I was just reading that bit where it was saying the uraeus was the transformed eye that had gone out
right.
Shu and Tefnut in the abyss. And so it has that sort of pulling out of the abyss and finding and making someone safe quality as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it lights it up, right? You turn on the lights, you do that, and that works against the damned, right? The power of the sun and the power of light. And this is actually made explicit in another spell that's on an Ostrakon. And I won't read you the whole spell, but basically the spell basically blames the dead and the damned for bringing nightmares. And at the end, parts of it are written in red to emphasize. The Egyptians use red as we sort of use bold. It actually says this spell is to be said over the 4 uraei, the rearing cobras, that are made of clay with fire in their mouths. And one is placed in each corner of a room in which there is a man or a woman sleeping. And actually, if you look up here in my picture, can you see that? I actually have a replica clay cobra figurine up there. I should go bring it close. We actually have clay uraei in museums. So we've actually found them. So this one on the right is one that's in the British Museum. It looks huge in this picture, I know. It's actually only about the size of the palm of my hand. The one I have there is a life-size one. And the other one's in the Berlin Museum. And these might be actual figurines that were placed in the bedrooms of Egyptians to keep away nightmares, which I just love that idea. And they've actually been found all over Egypt in a number of different sites. So these are made of clay for ordinary people. The pharaoh, of course, wouldn't need one of clay because he's got his own made of gold, like this beautiful one from the tomb of Tutankhamun down below on his mask. And then this upper one is one from the Middle Kingdom, made of gold and carnelian lapis lazuli, but it doesn't matter. It functions the same. So the ordinary people also had access to the same sort of superpower to dispel these nightmare-causing demons. And these were so important, they're actually found throughout Egypt. Here's my, again, very simple map with dots showing everywhere they've been found. They've even been found far to the west near the Libyan border in a fortress, and the Egyptians brought them with them. So you see there's a little line of them that go up along the Mediterranean, right up into Israel and as far as Lebanon. And they were small enough, again, that they could take them on the road. We know that sometimes they made them on the spot also because we have done chemical analyses on some of them. And the clay shows that they were made of local clay, but in Egyptian style. Another way to protect yourself from nightmares was by using a special kind of pillow. Now, the Egyptians, like many peoples in Africa and Asia, used headrests instead of soft, cushy pillows, which makes sense in a hot climate. They're still used today in parts of Asia. And in a certain time period in ancient Egypt, these are decorated with these cool beings. Again, beings that could have functioned in order to protect the person who is in a particularly vulnerable state. Because when you're sleeping, you're vulnerable, not only to the dead and the damned that can assault you in dreams, but to the living as well. So one of the beings that's often featured is this guy, who's called Bez. And he's oftentimes depicted as fully frontal. He has little lion ears. He's fully bearded, sometimes with a mane. He oftentimes has this ostrich feather headdress. And sometimes at some time periods, his tongue is sticking out, as it is in this beautiful example. This is a beautiful portable headdress. Sometimes the beings that are on them actually have weapons. So this particular headdress, which is in Heidelberg today, has a spell for good sleep going down the front. And on the base, on either side, I've here expanded and done a close-up of these weird kind of hybrid beings that you can see. One of them has the head of a crocodile. The other one is a head of a snake or a bird or something. It's difficult to tell. And they have weapons. So the crocodile one has a spear and a snake staff, as well as spitting snakes from his mouth and holding a snake in his rear hand as if it was a mace, as well as a knife on his foot. And the other one also has spear, and he's wielding knives on his feet and in his hands, as well as snakes. So their job could also would be to protect you from nightmares. And here's just a line drawing to show them a bit more clearly. And these are found actually not just on headrests, but they're also found on the footboards of beds. So I don't know how well you can see this. It's really hard to photograph gold um, but here again, you can see three beings, all of whom have these weapons and are enshrined. One of them, the central Bez that's looking right at you, is kind of cool because he has wings as well. And there's also this hippo hybrid being who carries weapons as well. And they come in a variety of shapes and forms. But again, their main job is to protect you from all sorts of demonic influences, but especially nightmares. What's kind of cool is the kind of knife that they hold also is very clearly depicted in the imagery. And it's a butcher knife. It's not the kind of knife that would be used in warfare, but butchery. So the idea, again, that they chop up these guys who are trying to attack you in the night with these knives as well. So you can think of them sort of almost like Egyptian ideas of dream catchers. This is actually a tourist dream catcher. This isn't it's just a modern tourist version, but it was just such a lovely photo. Thought I would use it. And dream catchers in Native American traditions serve to filter out all the bad dreams and only let the good ones in. It looks like Egyptians, at least in the New Kingdom, needed a little bit more than that. They needed to get even more aggressive and get these beings who would drive them out. So if we sort of bring together all the evidence, we can get sort of a picture of what would happen or how to defeat nightmares. So here's a little Egyptian sleeping on her headrest, and she's got a bad dream. Here come these bad nightmares. Fusile's painting has that nice pun in there. And she calls out, "Help," which in Egyptian is Yanu. And hopefully these protective 4 clay cobra figurines will protect her from any nightmares that might come in. But in case they don't, hopefully her headdress will come to power. Those beings will come into play. And if that doesn't work, she can always call upon the goddesses like Isis. And that's a form of Isis and her sister Nephthys, who are in the form of fire-spitting snakes there. Or she can call upon the god Ra. And if that doesn't work, somebody hopefully is around to slather her face with beer and with some mixture of bread and beer. So in ancient Egypt, we see that nightmares were both caused by these sort of liminal beings that can act in a malevolent way, but they're also defended against by these liminal beings that can be called upon for aid in times of trouble, as well as a host of spells and prescriptions. And it might be that these were just as effective as modern day psychoanalysis. I'll just leave you with the noting that in both cases, it's bearded men who seem to have been very involved. And I'll just stop that that was just sort of to give you an overview and hopefully spawn a whole host of interesting questions.
Thank you so much, Kasia. That was brilliant. The snake stuff I hadn't realised so much, and that's really interesting with like later developments in Greece with the Asclepius and the snake entwined around the staff. So maybe snakes have been identified with being dream protectors for a long time. And I guess there's the aspect as well of their venom being like a poison and a panacea at the same time. Like tiny amounts can be useful and obviously can kill you as well. Really good. It's interesting. I love headrests. I always just think, how does anyone ever actually fall deeply asleep? They've got a brilliant collection of headrests at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. Yep. And I thought that people slept on headrests like this, because they're sort of to protect elaborate headgear also as well sometimes. But I wonder whether lying in that kind of like stable position, or for however long they did, you kind of think that they probably didn't sleep 8 hours a night in that instance. That you would have get sleep paralysis if you're like stayed in the same position all the time.
Well, I don't know. I think you can move around. We also have evidence that they had cloths on them and they would soften them. Yeah. They serve a number of purposes. I mean, it's first of all, it keeps your head cooler, but it also stops, because there's a lot of insects and bugs, and it helps keep them away from, climbing up to get you. I did notice I was having bad neck pain for a while, and I was going to see an osteopath, and she would do this thing where I would lay on my back and she would hold my head. And at one point she went, "God, I wish I had this head, like a rest for a head that would just keep you. And in fact, the position, we think, we haven't done studies, we always said we should do a joint study on whether these headrests actually put your head in exactly that right position where it just releases the tension. I don't know. They do come in many shapes and sizes. Some were also used for embalming, just like today. Morticians use headrests as well for embalming, to hold the head up. And they were found in tombs. Some probably weren't used in life. Some were just used in tombs. Some show a lot of wear, so they were used in life. But again, you'd have to ask somebody who uses them today, how long they sleep for, because they are used, and they've been used in the Far East, in Asia, and Polynesia as well.
Yeah, they do seem like the is it Wedez, the headrest name in Egyptian?
Yeah.
And it does seem to also relate to the kind of cult around death as well, and this idea, because I've read somewhere that it echoed the hieroglyph for horizon. So your head lying in the headrest was like the sun going down, and then rising up in the morning was reawakening. And was there seen to be this relationship between the afterlife and the realm that you entered in dreams? Because I know you could see gods and dead people in dreams. So were you essentially entering the same realm?
I don't think you are. The Duat, which is the Egyptian afterlife, was inhabited by the dead, the damned, and the gods. So they all lived together there, right? But there's no evidence that the Egyptians went in there. In dreams, you can see there, and other beings can come out, but there's no evidence. Unlike in Mesopotamian literature, where you've got the great story of Gilgamesh and stuff, going down into the underworld. That didn't seem to happen in ancient Egypt. It was a one-way, man. Once you go in, you can come out again once you've been transfigured into a justified dead. You've been transfigured into a spirit. Then you can come back out and in and out. But while you're alive, it doesn't look like you could go in.
I've seen the rendering of the word rasut with the determinative being two pieces of wood lashed together, which I don't know if that's another way of.
Oh, that's actually not the determinative. That's res. That sign makes the sound rs.
Okay.
So that's actually just, they're just writing it out.
So does that mean something like foreign travel or something like that, that determinative of those two pieces of wood lashed together?
No, it's not usually used as a determinative, not the res. It's not usually used as a determinative. There is one that's similar for foreigner, which is a throw stick.
Maybe that's what.
Yeah, the aamu.
Because when I saw dream written up with that determinative, I did think that maybe it means like they're traveling in some sort of foreign realm.
Yeah, no, the determinatives usually that it has, like, it can appear without a determinative, but usually it's the open eye. And then there's the one case of that one divine figure, which I suggest is Anubis. Others have said is Seth. The nose is upturned though, and it's clearly upturned. So when I've looked at other handwriting, Seth is one of the distinguishing feature about Seth is that it's clearly goes down as opposed to up.
He's got a strange face. He's kind of like aardvarky looking.
Exactly. Yeah, or an anteater or something, or a giraffe or something.
Right. Other questions from other people here. Oleg asks, what about cats? Were they involved in the protection of a dreamer at all?
No. At least not that we know of. We don't have them involved in protecting at all. In fact, cats weren't. They don't. They when they appear in spells, they usually appear in spells that are against malevolent snakes, which makes sense. Yeah, because snakes can kill.
Cats can kill snakes.
Cats can kill snakes. Yeah. So, and you see depictions of the god Ra, the sun god, actually taking the form of a tomcat, actually slicing up a snake who is a personification of chaos itself. His name's Apep.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see them associated with dreams at all. Not at all.
Gwyn asks, are there examples of snakes on bed corners or bedroom furniture at all?
Yes, loads.
They were on that
Loads.
gold panel, weren't they? And I thought that was really interesting, because it really ties in with the Asclepian idea of the snake being a kind of healing, protective entity.
The snakes are the ultimate protector, the
Yeah.
absolute ultimate protector from throughout all of Egyptian history. That's something that stays, is they are because it's basically the, I always think of it as the flamethrower of Ra. So, and actually, I wish I had a picture of it now. At the Egypt Center here in Swansea, we have two bed legs, one of which features a Bez image,
Mm-hmm.
and another one features the hippo thing who's got a knife on her foot, and both have snakes on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And their bed legs. So they're oftentimes on there. Again, they're oftentimes, on the outside, right? Because you got to get past that snake.
Yeah.
In the afterlife, the same thing. The gates that you have to go through in the afterlife, that the sun god goes through, each one has got a rearing snake protecting it as well. So, yeah.
Janet asks, was there a god of dreams?
Not in this time period at all. There's no gods associated with, there's no god of good dreams. Isis appears in that one spell, but that's in her role as healer. She also appears in spells to protect against burns or stomach aches or fevers or, lots of different things.
She was incorporated into the sleep temple cults later on as well. So she kind of continued into the Greek, didn't she?
Exactly. The Greeks really liked her. They took a fancy to her. They thought, this is a superhero we like. This god we'll keep her. She's a good one. And of course, the treatment of dreams changes dramatically in the Greco-Roman period, and even slightly before then.
Is Tutu seen as a protective dream entity?
Tutu is interesting. Tutu is an example of a demon who becomes a god. Again, he's not known till the late period at all. So it's far after this time period. There is no Tutu yet. He doesn't exist yet. Which is interesting because he does have knives on his feet as well. I'm slightly obsessed with the knives on the feet thing, because as far as I know, Egypt's the only culture that has beings that have knives on feet. Aside from one James Bond episode, which features an archvillain who has a knife coming out of her shoe.
So what would have been the kind of dominant dream demons of the early period?
They're not named. They're described as the sort of anonymous horde of malevolent dead. So in other words, the dead that did not make it through to the afterlife, that either transgressed against the king or the gods, or didn't have the right rituals carried out and were doomed to be eternally tortured in the afterlife.
Sounds like that bit in Ghost where the black demons come out and grab people.
I didn't see it.
Oh, it's horrible.
But so it's blamed on them, and they just use the generic term. It's a word called moot. And they're also blamed on the generic enemies. So just the enemies of the sun god, the chaotic beings. And they have another word, adversaries, also that they can use for these. So there's no specific being, which again is different from Mesopotamia, because in Mesopotamia you have Lamashtu, and she brings nightmares, and she's fought against by Pazuzu, who featured in The Exorcist.
Does it relate a lot to the kind of concepts of darkness and dark being chaos, and therefore the kind of order is created by the presence of light?
Exactly.
I guess, if it was dark, then you'd have to light a candle or something in order to be illuminated. So it does, because I've been reading a lot that book I was telling you about when we were chatting earlier is all about this kind of battle between light and dark, and that all the chaos and the evil things lives in the darkness. And so being asleep at night, you are entering the kind of ultimate darkness. So you're exposing yourself to the perils within it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And you're let me turn off the screen share, stop share. There we go. And so you're, yeah, you're totally in the dark and paralyzed and and scary times. So yeah, these guys in the afterlife also, they're not able to see the light of the sun. Most of the descriptions of the afterlife sort of revolve around the sun going through and everybody going, yay, the sun is here giving light, yay, you know, he's here. We all wake up and then he goes by and they all go back to sleep again.
I've got a couple of other questions here.
Yep.
I've asked you before about the dream incubation thing. Is there any evidence of any kind of dream incubation or dreaming for purpose in the early period, or do all of those things come later on?
They come later on. They come later on. And actually a brilliant book has been written about those. Here, I'll tout my friend Gil Renberg, Where Dreams May Come.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2 volumes. It's huge. It's dense. And it's all about incubation sanctuaries in the Greco-Roman world. But he starts off by talking about sort of the rise of incubation in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. And in Egypt, the earliest evidence we have is of a person going to a temple in order to get a dream is in the Greco-Roman period. There might be a little bit before then, in about 300 BCE, so slightly, well, it's actually after the Greco, that's in the Ptolemaic period already. That's the earliest evidence we have. And what's kind of interesting, in one of the early texts we have of it is an Egyptian, I can't remember the whole story, he's talking to somebody else, and he notes that there's a Cretan dream interpreter in the area in Memphis who's particularly good. So in fact, it's like the Egyptians themselves are not claiming that they're particularly good at dream interpretation. And for the dreams that were reported that I talked about, all of them were spontaneous. So they were not asked for. And that's the crucial difference between an incubation dream and a spontaneous dream. One is you're consciously seeking it. There is one stela where a man writes that he performs rituals dedicated to Merit Sager, who's this divinity in the Theban area. And he does rituals in a sacred pool there, and he goes to sleep there. But there's no evidence that he's going to sleep for any other reason than he feels close to her there. There's actually graffiti to her. It seems to have been a little grotto where likely during rainstorms, the rain came down, because we actually have ancient evidence of stonework being built there to protect the tombs nearby from getting flooded. Happened in the ancient world also, as much as today. But otherwise, no, doesn't seem like it. And again, I think the idea of dream incubation assumes that dreams are good, but I don't think in the Egyptian view, if you said, oh, that ice cream is really dreamy, ice cream, or that was a Grey's Anatomy.
They have a word for like nightmarish.
Yeah, it might have been, or something that's untrustworthy or not controllable. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have a positive connotation.
But there isn't a word for nightmare where there's exclusively a bad dream. No,
they have, and dreams were either said to be good or bad. And the words for nightmare are oftentimes things like terror in the night.
I've been looking at the dream interpretation kind of manual that you shared. I was reading about common dreams in Egypt, and I read about how one of the common dreams was that your face was turning into a leopard. And have you seen much evidence of that?
Well, it's not, we have one omen like that in that book. That's it.
Oh, okay. So that was like what everyone dreamt about all the time.
Common, yeah. No, that it's not common. And again, it's based on a pun. It's based on a pun with the word khair, which is face. Probably the most common outcomes of the dreams in the Book of Dream Interpretations all had to do with promotion, increase in wealth, more food, things like that. Freud would be disappointed because sex does not feature very much. Neither does fun things.
Do you think they kept the sex dreams to themselves though? Because a lot of the sex dreams were seen as being bad omens, weren't they? So maybe you would have kept that on the down low.
Some of them were good. All the ones in this dream book, they feature dream sex with your wife, but also with your mother, which is considered a good thing in the Greek world as well. It means, your clan. It means your clansmen and your tribe, as we would say today, will cleave to you. So it kind of makes sense. There might have been dreams featuring sisters, but it's hard to know because the word for girlfriend or lover is the same as sister. So later on, they get really weird dreams with sex. So the Demotic dream book, which there was a few of them, so I shouldn't say the dramatic, there's a number of them in the Greek and the Roman period, feature dreams that a woman might have. And there's a whole segment of dreams of a woman dreaming that she's with another guy other than her husband, and they're all bad. And I guess if you're a male scribe, you can see sort of why you would write that.
Maybe like women having more racy dreams than blokes, maybe in ancient times.
Well, but they're all bad. The results are always bad. So to my mind, it's more like, don't even think about being with somebody else.
Yeah, probably you'd keep it all like to your own little group of girlfriends. You wouldn't go to a dream scribe with that stuff. Gwyn asked, did people, you were saying earlier about dream incubation and this idea of sleeping in the sanctuary of a god to be close to them and to have contact maybe in the dream realm. So you said that's something that has been documented, people going to temple to sleep.
Well, just one time. Later on we have the Asclepion as in the Greco-Roman period, but in the earlier time period, in the Ramesside period, we do have examples of people sleeping by gods, but not necessarily to get a dream. Sometimes, often, they just want to be literally in their shadow. And the reason is, if you're in somebody's shadow, you're very close to them and protected by them. So there's no evidence at all that they do it in order to get any sort of, visitation or dream. Doesn't mean they didn't. I'm just saying that they didn't. We can't necessarily say that.
Yeah, one of the things that you brought up was really interesting about the dreams that are recorded, because the same kind of thing happens in the Greek period as well, of there being these classifications of dreams. So some of the dreams, they don't need interpretation. They're just a divine experience that kind of changes that person's life, and that they feel they've really had an encounter there. They don't need to be told what's happened. They just feel what's happened. And then other dreams need this kind of like interpretation and working out of the kind of puzzling elements of it. So do you see this classification sometimes with the dream literature?
You mean
you see
in the dream book, they're just listed. It's interesting, all the good ones are listed in a row, but there's no heading, but the beginning of the text is gone.
Okay,
so it may be that there was a heading at the beginning, because you have I think it's 109 good dreams. Then you have a bunch of bad dreams, 83 of them. And then you've got that section that is the description of the Seth person. And then it says, here are the dreams of the followers of Seth. And then there's the 4 dreams that are broken, and then that's it. So that's the only classification.
Horus is a really interesting aspect of that, because it's very strange that the red-headed Seth followers are all angry, and the calm Zen-like Horus followers get dreams.
Well, it doesn't say they're dreams of the followers of Horus at the beginning. That's not said anywhere. People assume that, but again, there could have been many more types. Who knows how long this papyrus was? There could have been dreams of the followers of Hathor, ginger hate everywhere. Yeah, I know. It's that redheaded temper thing. But what's kind of neat is the Egyptian ideal person was one that was very humble and quiet, and do what they're told. And then the Seth person, it seems to be a personality type who's sort of the exact opposite. So he overdrinks. it's interesting, the text also said he could be a member of the upper classes, but he behaves basically like a plebeian, like a peasant. So who knows how many more types there could have been. The later dream books, the Greco-Roman ones, they actually have categories. They have like a whole section of category of dreams of beer, people drinking beer. And there's beer dreams, the women's dreams.
Beer dreams are probably, you know, dreams, hops are a good treatment for sleep and everything. So probably quite a few dreams in ancient Egypt were beer induced, I would imagine.
I bet. Beer, wine.
Victoria brings up the sort of biblical aspect and the idea of Joseph being the dream interpreter to one of the pharaohs. Is there any evidence that the pharaohs had their own personal dream interpreters? I've read that Imhotep might be the biblical Joseph, and Imhotep is given these qualities later on sometimes about having dream magic powers.
Yeah, if you take you know, the context of that particular story was possibly, they think now, recorded around 750 BCE, and it arose in Canaan, right, and out of Mesopotamian influence, where they did have dream interpretation early on. So the concept of dream interpretation would have been very, very, very familiar to the Hebrews. I mean, that would have been part of their culture.
They had
So
a big snake as well, didn't they?
Yeah. So ascribing it to Egypt is sort of no surprise that they did that. The only evidence for a dream being interpreted to a pharaoh is the one of Tano-Tamani, which is approximately the same time period, around 750 or 664 BCE, about 660 BCE. But it doesn't say it was interpreted, that there's any interpreter. There's no word for dream interpreter in ancient Egypt at all. We do have, from 300 BCE, a series of texts called, it's the Archive of Hor. It's an archive of a priest. And he is actually hired to dream for people and to interpret dreams, but he's a priest. So that's one of his duties. And it's the same thing in Tano-Tamani. He goes to see a priest, where he has a priest interpret it for him, not a specialist.
Do you think the kind of experience of reality would have been different for ancient Egyptian people, than perhaps a dream life and a waking reality may have been more blended as kind of consciousness has evolved?
I'm not so sure that dream life and I'm not convinced that they're so separate today. At least not in my world.
I think like the kind of preoccupation with the realms of the imagination and this idea of like the spirit, I mean the idea of the car as well, and the life essence of someone, was that ever incorporated into the ideas about dreams or where you might travel to?
No, not really. They don't seem to have been. Again, it's really hard because all we have is what they considered important enough to record.
Yeah.
You know, if I were to talk to an ancient Egyptian farmer today, he might say, oh my gosh, no, we would wake up every morning and we would share our dreams. But I have no idea. He might go, we would go every morning, you know, and sit under this date palm and you know, try to incubate dreams. But the only thing we have is what they considered important enough to record. You have to remember the literacy rate was so low. It was so low there, you know, anywhere from only 1% to 5%. So then it becomes a matter of not only what is important enough for me to either record myself or hire somebody, right, to pay the money, not the money, but because they didn't use money, but to you know, do the exchange, to barter for them to record. And then it becomes a matter of survival. What has survived?
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, not that much has survived from ancient Egypt. A lot more writing has survived from that culture than many others, and we're very lucky, don't get me wrong. But there could be so much more there. I always say everything that I've said, a trove could be found tomorrow that changes it. We go, oh my gosh, we've got this, you know, Book of Dreams and their interpretations all the way back in the Old Kingdom. Great.
Do you ever have interactions with ancient Egyptian dream demons in your nightmares?
Oh no, my nightmare, I don't know. I know my nightmares are all just weird. I have like the weirdest dreams on the planet, I think. They're psychotic, they're crazy, they're weird. I wouldn't say that they're ancient Egyptian at all. However, I will say when I initially started working on this way back when I was a PhD student, and it was my dissertation, and I did a lot of anthropological research. And I also did a lot of research on nightmares, and that's where I learned about anxiety, night terrors.
Mm.
When I was reading about those, oh my gosh, I had the worst nightmares.
Mm.
Reading about those night terrors and people's experiences freaked me out so badly. So one interesting thing I think we can say from things like the dream book is we do tend to dream about things that happened in the day,
Mm.
or you can influence. I mean, I used to also play this video game called Baldur's Gate, or whatever. I could transform into a dragon. And I remember I had a lucid dream one time where, I dreamt I was a dragon. I was actually playing the game in my dream,
Mm.
because I had just been doing that. So we can sort of get an idea of what was on the Egyptians' minds based on the dream book, which is why I think things like promotion and wealth come up so much. Because I suspect that book of dream interpretations was designed for people living in a village in Deir el-Medina, what I call sort of the upwardly mobile ancient Egyptian male, because they're clearly designed for men.
Yeah, that was all for men, wasn't it? That dream.
Yeah.
I guess that they would go for dream interpretation to interpret a dream that was potentially like an oracle or a prophecy about that future. So maybe like the mundane, everyday or weird dreams wouldn't get that kind of treatment because that's more of an everyday occurrence potentially.
Yeah.
And the oracular function of dreams, was that in Egypt? Because that was certainly like a big thing in Greece as well.
Yeah, we do have oracles, and they're actually written on pieces of clay, where some of them say things like, will my dreams be good ones?
Mm.
And presumably on the back will be yes or no, or we think that the way the oracles worked is the god was carried out on a palanquin, and then the priests would step forward a couple steps if it was yes, or nod or something, and then step backwards if it was no. Nobody knows how this would have worked. How did they all decide whether, okay, we're all going to move forward now? Nobody knows. But we also have what were called oracular amuletic decrees that occur at the very end of the New Kingdom, which are long lists, very, very long and narrow strips of papyrus, and on there are promises from a divinity for a child. And these would be rolled up and then placed in a little cylinder that was worn around the neck. And we know that because we
one of those little cylinders. I was wondering what they were for. There's one at the Petrie Museum in London. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so they would be rolled up and put in there. And those also do mention dreams. Again, keeping them good. So they always say something like, we the gods, Amun, Mut, and Khonsu, we promise that we will keep the child, Anket, I'll make up her name, safe from, and then it gives a whole list of things, which includes cool things like falling off walls, which I guess that happened a lot. Demons
Can't say anything though, just in case, like tempting fate. Seems strange.
Yeah. And then some of the things is we will keep them from having any bad dreams, or we will prevent anybody dreaming dreams for that person or of that person. Or so I presume somebody causing bad dreams. There's also one letter, a single letter, where a woman writes to her friend, another woman, and she says, I'm going to go see the oracle of Ahmose Nefertari about a dream that I've seen. And that's it. We don't know anything more.
Maybe she never.
Very frustrating. It's so frustrating always. It's like, I want to know more. Did she go? What was the dream? Was it a good one? I suspect that they wouldn't talk about the bad dreams because we never have the content of the bad dreams. They're blamed on the dead and the damned. But aside from that one guy saying, the dead servant was watching him, the content isn't given. And perhaps that's because, like in that spell, they thought, if you write it down, it's
You
going
man-
to come true.
yeah.
Yeah, you're just guaranteed for yourself bad things. So it's a pity.
Oleg asks, were there entities resembling the European succubus or incubus? It sounds like there were like sleep paralysis, like holding down on the chest type experiences, especially all of
Absolutely. Yeah, where things crush you, and they had, you know, things that would penetrate your body. I mean, a lot of diseases were blamed on beings that would, you know, were actually penetrating you, often through various orifices, ears or noses, you know, and likewise they could be expelled the same way. Some of those spells get very graphic, you know, vomit out, you demon, you know, and others that are graphic that I won't say, you know, as well. So in that sense, yes. But they wouldn't be depicted. They would be described.
in fear
But, you
of
know,
manifesting them.
exactly, yeah. Which is why the good little demons, those good genies, were drawn, because by the very act of creating the drawing, you're helping it come into being. By having it around you, it can manifest
Do you think that
and come to life.
of a lot of ancient Egyptian art, where they created these lavish, beautiful scenes to manifest them in some dimension, to make them real, and perhaps populate their dreams as well with those kind of images and experiences?
Absolutely, absolutely, because they really believed that, you know, writing was performative. When you recorded it, it happened. That's why Egyptians never recorded losing a battle.
Yeah.
Even though the Battle of Kadesh, we know, was probably a tie, both sides claim they won, because, you know, why would you record something bad happen and have it happen over and over and over? So all the sort of hostile beings or malevolent beings, when they are depicted, like they are in some tombs in the New Kingdom, they're always restricted. So they're bound, they are immobilized with daggers. We have images of the damned being burned in cauldrons of fire, some, you know, upside down with their hearts taken out. So they're always they're never in this, they're always rendered harmless.
That's an interesting aspect of dreaming as well, actually. I was reading about the concept of the heart being the kind of seat of intelligence, wisdom, and the spirit, and the brain. I've read one of the kind of descriptions as being skull offal, the idea of the brain being not very important. So the heart was seen, and what I was reading was saying that because they observed that the blood vessels spread from the heart all throughout the body, that was seen as like the place where all your kind of actions and feelings and ideas came from. So would that also relate in some way into like dreams emanating from the heart or coming from the heart, whereas now we kind of are more likely to think of them as coming from the brain?
I wonder, yeah, I don't know if they'd think they came from the heart, because the heart was the seat of consciousness and will. Whereas the dream was very explicitly something out of your control. So I suspect they would come from the belly, because the belly was the seat of emotion. It was also the seat of Heka, which is the Egyptian force of, you know, magic is not a good word. I hate the word magic. I think of it as an energy. It's a powerful energy. And it's always described as being in the belly, the Heka. So yeah, perhaps they came from there, as opposed to, yeah, the brain was just, you know, I mean, it doesn't do anything obvious, does it? Although they recognize that if you had a head wound and you could see the brain pulsing, it's not good.
I thought the skull offal was an amazing description. Sounds great.
It is. That's it. Yeah. Oh, brains are. They're gray, they're gooey, they're kind of nasty.
Well, I think we've gone too far the other way now, where we kind of ascribe everything to happenings in the brain, and actually we have neurons in our heart and we have serotonin receptors in our gut. So actually we are much more a kind of holistic experiencer of reality than neuroscience maybe gives us credit. So
yeah.
Oleg says it looks similar to the idea of an Indian Kundalini, maybe a Shaktipat transmission.
It is interesting how in many cultures that lower abdomen is important in a seat of power. I mean, I used to do
the base of your spine as well. This idea of the energy residing in the lower chakra and rearing up along your spinal column.
Yeah. And the lower, and it is the lower belly in particular for the Egyptians. The belly. The word chet itself, actually the sound chet, which I'm totally mispronouncing, I'm sure the Egyptians would just be laughing at us right now, is actually, the sign is made up of the belly of some animal, but it's the lower belly. The teats are clearly depicted in the so it's that and perhaps it's because, you know, we feel so much in our bellies when you're terrified.
Especially if you're having a lot of anxiety dreams. Anxiety certainly resides in the gut, and at night, if you do suffer from anxiety during the day, that kind of all comes into play. And your gut goes through like slow wave phases that mimic the phases of the brain, so it has this communication. So it would make sense. And also what you eat, I think, really affects your dream quality often.
There's a lot of food in the dream book, a lot of food in the dream book, and a lot of beer too. But also you get butterflies in your stomach. So you get the good things too in the stomach as well. You get the little flutters of excitement, and, you know, and we even say, I have a gut feeling.
But they do often represent Egyptian people with bellies as well. Like there's a sort of prominence given often to the belly, which looks really strange because they're often presenting a sort of perfected image of themselves. But especially like Akhenaten or those Amarna reliefs, they always have like little pot bellies, which I've always thought is really interesting because it doesn't seem like a natural thing to do these days.
Oh, well, even in the Old Kingdom, the scribes and mayors were always fat. They had rolls of fat because that means you can have a lot of food. You can afford a lot of food. Fat is wealth. So, you know, they also showed starving people at that time, which was obviously just is never good in any culture. Showing the, you know, the bones and everything. Yeah, it's interesting about the bellies. I can actually get they change through time. You could do an art history study because you can actually, if you get a fragment of relief that has a female breast and a belly, I can tell you what time period it's from. Because the art styles change. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I mean, I think I've asked all of my questions. Does anyone else have any other questions? You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask them in person. Is there any? Oh, here we go. Win.
What? I can't hear you. Wait. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you. Though. You're just breaking up.
Okay, how's this?
That's it. Great.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, old technology, and I can't have too many things going on. I know we don't know a lot about healing and medicines and everything. I find it strange that that dreams wouldn't have been part of the assessment of someone's health or what was wrong with them, the ways that the Chinese had the humors of the body. Because as far back as, say, Mongolian, nomadic cultures, they also saw the night, the sky. What happened at night was something important. When you went to someone and you said, I don't feel well, the first thing would say, well, what have you been eating? What have you been dreaming? Have you been dancing? Like all of the things. And that's pretty uniform across, if you were to look at a timeline and then compare all the cultures, down, you would see it at the same time in Chinese, even African, because they would have rituals of sound and things like that, because that helped to change and alter the body.
Well, I found when I did, like I said, I did a lot of anthropological research on dreams. And one of the most interesting things I learned and realized was that there is no universal method of viewing dreams. So even in Africa, Africa itself is not a monolithic culture. Um, each area, the different tribes, different cultures, different people in South America, North America, Asia, there's loads of cultures. There was such a range. In some, dreams weren't mentioned at all. In some, you wake up every morning and you share dreams. In some, dreaming is only ever a verb. In others, it was only ever a noun. In some, it could be both. So I don't think there is a universal. I'm not really surprised that they didn't use dreams as a diagnostic feature. I mean,
Yes.
we don't really today either. So they seem to be really practical. We do have quite a few texts dealing with medicine. And for the most part, it seemed to have been very practical. Oftentimes, of course, the source was known anyways. And if the source is known, then, you just have to know what to do. So we have these great Edwin Smith papyrus, which has all the wounds in battle. And if somebody has got a crushed skull, what do you do? It was a mace that caused it, or whatever. Whereas the internal problems that had no obvious source, those would be, those were blamed on demons, but they never really mentioned why, like the further connection of why did that demon enter that person wasn't made, or if it was, again, it wasn't recorded. So it was just, oh my gosh, that person's got a high fever and there's pustules coming up, there's somebody inside causing it, or they've got extreme pain in their belly and there's, their tummy's hurting, we've got to expel the demon, it will come out as a smelly wind, and yes, there's a text that says that, and then they'll feel better, So it seems to have been a lot of trial and error, or
In my readings of a great many cultures and very early ones, was that obviously in the morning there was either the fetching of the water or there was, the sitting around and making whatever was going to be the meal, whether it was rice or a bread or, whatever. And I have read in so many that it was a woman's discussion. And it was something that the women did together. When most children stayed with mothers up until 5 or 4, or whatever the culture was, that was part of it, because they were the ones that were seeing the child, rise. That's how they would decide if somebody was a Seth, which I was totally a Seth. I was totally a Seth. I think, again, just finding the records, I think there's so much that hasn't been found yet. We stumbled on Egypt. Meanwhile, in Japan and China, they have much clearer timelines and records, only because that's how they shared themselves with future generations. Where else would be sources for that time? I understand, 750 BC would obviously, in the Roman period, obviously they were going back and making it sound much more interesting. Have we really got that many women's sources?
No, we have no idea. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
If something is done orally and only orally, we'll never know unless it's recorded. That's the only way is if there's some evidence. We have no idea what they did. They could have got up and drank beer. They could have got up and run around the house 13 times every day. We have no idea.
I recently saw Stella on one of these conversations, and I'm going possibly to too many, I will admit that.
No.
And it had a set of 3 pairs of ears. And in the conversation, they were talking about how people used to go to these tombs and would read the spells off the walls. You know, certain ones, you know, would help women with fertility, or they would be lessons for children, or, you know, after a famous somebody was having it built. And I always found it interesting that with particularly the ears, you know, everybody thought of, you know, the actual physical ear as opposed to sound. Have you ever seen any other ways that sound may have been interpreted, such as, you know, the tomb on the wall? You know, they would know which spells to read out, you know, and it would be something that would be passed on from generation to generation. But were there other things showing, say, making foot stamps, you know, clapping, you know?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We have lots of evidence for sound and music making and sound making. The ear stela are fantastic. I love those. To me, it's like, here, I'm going to put a big picture of an ear because then you'll hear it better. It's like a, what do they call those horns that make your voice louder? The
Loudhailer.
bullhorn?
Megaphone.
Yeah, megaphone. That's it. It's like a megaphone. Here, listen to me. It's also, you'll find them even on stela of people who didn't record much because they were illiterate probably, but at least they've got the message is clear. But yes, we have clappers. We have a lot of rituals where, and texts that explicitly state that part of the importance of the rituals is the music and the sound. Absolutely. In one of them, as a matter of fact, it says something like I can't remember if it's the music is the food of the god. And it's the same with scent. There's a lot of emphasis on scent as well. And the whole sensing of offerings is actually because it goes up on smoke then, you know, and
well, your words, if you were chanting out loud or if you were saying something together, went faster. The idea that it didn't have any boundaries. It wasn't, you know, sound went across, you know, whatever the portal was between one and the other.
And the word,
sorry,
the word
I'm
for
having a tough time.
Oh, the word for read and the word for recite were also the same. So, you know, when you read, you're reciting by force, which again makes it happen. So be careful what you write down.
Yeah. And yes, I do ask all the questions, and I ask too many. And I was the child in school who would be, can you not ask any more questions?
Yeah, me too.
But I'm always interested.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, that was absolutely brilliant, Kasia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I love doing this. This was fun.
Yeah, it was really good.
It's my
favorite subject. I think we've answered them all.
Oh, Ontario. I'm from Ontario, Canada. I'm from Kanata, Ontario.
I'm in St. Thomas, south of London. And the only reason I didn't go into archaeology or giraffe research 30 years ago is that they didn't think that that was actually a valid career. Yeah. So, and once you hit 50 and I'm partially disabled, it's not something I'm going to ever get into. So I am an armchair archaeologist.
Excellent. Good. Good. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
That was really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks a million, Kasia. I will send you an email, and hopefully we can do another one again.
Yeah.
When you go back to work? Do you go back to work for the next?
I haven't stopped working.
Oh, you're just doing your lectures on Zoom.
Just because we're not on campus, it does. Yeah, no, we've been. As a matter of fact, it takes longer because you know, I don't know. I find it much more time consuming.
we're used to snow days, which can
Yeah.
turn into snow weeks. So
Yep.
the whole remote and learning to work from a distance is kind of our thing. Plus, Canada is so spread out that we are at least 3 different time zones.
I know.
Which is,
My brother's in Halifax, which is a different time zone
yes,
than my sister in
yeah.
Montreal, and so it's yeah. It's more time zones than the U.S. 5 time zones. No, is it 4 instead of 3? Oh God, no numbers. Don't ask me. Numbers.
I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again. And this will be uploaded onto YouTube, so if you've missed bits of it, then you can watch it there. But thanks again, Kasia. That was really great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.